Hi, if you're looking for a video to get started with watercolor, this is the right video for you. Welcome to Letitia Houston Art, where I'm spreading a little light to the world through the canvas. Today is going to be an introduction to watercolors. So we're going to use three different mediums. We're using watercolor pencil, we're using watercolor discs, and we're using textures. So this is going to be a two-part series because I'm showing you how to use a few different mediums. And then after that, we're going to paint together and come up with some projects. So stay tuned for those videos and hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, ding, so that you can see these videos coming up in your feed. So now we've got that out of the way, let's paint. Okay, we are ready. So we've got two containers of water, one for dirty water, one for clean water. Now I'm not very good at doing that, so hey, this is a first. We've got the masking tape, we've got our watercolor discs which we're using today. You can also use watercolor paints in the tube if you want. Doesn't matter. So now we've got textures which are watercolor activated. Activated with water is what I mean to say. We've got watercolor pencils activated by water. We've got a variety of brushes. I've got some small flat brushes, a detailed brush, and I've got a round brush and a medium flat brush as well. We also have a piece of paper which is necessary, 300 gram SM the paper is, so that it doesn't warp. Anything less than that and it may buckle once you apply pressure with a little bit of water. So the tape, we're going to tape down the edges, just makes it easier to work and stops your paper from running away and getting legs. And then we're going to section it off as well. So I thought I'd take this opportunity while everything's getting taped down to let you know what techniques we're going to be working on today. So we're going to work wet and wet. You will see me take paint directly out of the discs, but they're going to be a little bit wet, so they're going to have minimal water. But basically it's wet and wet. So we've sectioned everything off. Just allows us to see all the various techniques we've got going on. Our paper towel for extra dabbing. There's a look at the watercolor pencils. I'm just going to use two colors today. And we're getting ready. We've got our watercolor discs. I'm going to use green and I'm going to use yellow. So you can use whatever colors you like, doesn't matter. So we're going to do a flat wash to begin with. So just mix a generous amount of your paint first. If you don't, you've got to keep going back in and dabbing at your watercolor, and you might not get the same color and consistency across the page if you do that. Just makes it a little more difficult. You want to wet your page down. We're using a side-to-side motion, flat, same color, which is what a flat wash is, same color the whole way through. So I want to be a little bit stronger, so I'm just going over it again. But you can see it's the same consistency, it's wet on wet, and we're happy with that. Now we're going to move to the graded wash. Again, we're going to wet down the section, and then we're going to work from dark to light. So it's dark at a strong amount of color at the top. I'm not really taking my brush off the page, I'm just letting the color fade out, which is a graded wash. You can add more water as you go down the page as well, and that'll also help fade the color out. I'm just going to let it do its thing in this case. I'm not going to put any extra water with it, I'm just going to let it fade out. So that is a graded wash, wet in wet. So those two techniques are used quite regularly. We're going to do the third one. We're actually going to bleed the color out a little bit. So again, wet your page generously. We're going to use a round brush for this one because it's going to help the paint drop on the page a little better. See how it bleeds out? And how far your paint bleeds depends on how much water you've got on the page. So the more water, the more the color's going to bleed out, and it makes it easy to blend when it's like this. So sometimes you can just drop the color onto the page and it'll, you know, connect together and immerse itself. So see how it's spreading now and it's creating a really cool pattern? Cool. So now we're going to do the same thing again. Round brush, drop your paint down, and then we're going to work it a little bit. So I'm just using a small detailed brush to show you what you can do. So I'm just pulling out from the edges into the water, and it's just spreading, lightly spreading. And now I'm going to use my yellow and we're going to blend it upwards and they'll come together. So it just gives you more control. So this technique is often used for a background, or if you're doing hair or you want a nice atmospheric sort of background. Notice that these colors dry very differently. The colors look really bold and bright now, but when it dries a lot softer with watercolor, especially if you're using a wet and wet technique. So now again, we're going to wet the page down with clean water. We're going to do the same again, just blend it out. A little more paint now this time, just moving it around the page. Really easy to smooth it out. So now we're going to blend in the yellow, but we're going to add salt on the top of this. So we're just going to drop some salt rock crystals on top. Don't touch it, let it dry, and we'll come back and we'll see the effect of what's going on there. Basically it creates a cool coppery effect. Now we switch to our watercolor pencil. And with the watercolor pencil I've kind of really pressed quite hard. I'm working vertically, and then I've just shaded it to light and I've eased up on the pressure of the pencil, just so you can see the color. But it's a whole lot softer than the watercolor paint. And we're just going to go over it with a small amount of water on top. You don't need a lot. And you'll see that it creates a really nice soft effect. Again, it's good for backgrounds as well. But I often use watercolor pencil for details, especially when you're using watercolor, because it's quite a blurry, soft effect, especially if you work wet in wet. But if you want a little sharpness and a little detail, I use a pencil. So then we just come over the top with the water, smooth it out. I'm using a smaller brush, so I probably should use a bigger one. And that's another tip. Larger the area, the larger the brush. The smaller the area, use a smaller brush. So let me go over this now, and I'm just going to use a bigger brush. The bigger brushes also hold more water, which sometimes causes pooling. So you just need to get a paper towel and just dab where the pools of water are, nice and carefully. Probably actually better to use a tissue, because paper towel can actually leave the texture of the paper towel on the watercolor, which is cool, but you might not want that. So now we're going to use another watercolor pencil. We're going to work diagonally and we're going to blend two colors together. So I've got purple and a dark blue pencil, and we're going to blend those. So it's easy to blend with the pencils. Just going to shade in one color, and then we're going to overlap with the next pencil. Here we go. So we're just overlapping that color and just following on down a diagonal sort of motion, moving across the page. There we go. And then again, we're going to put the water on top. And what you can do with watercolor pencil and watercolor paint is you can use your watercolor pencil effect as the base, and then you can blend in watercolor on top of it. So you guys will figure out your own sort of range of techniques and ways to use things together. A lot of things come by experimentation, and you're probably already doing them and don't know what the technique is called or what you're actually doing, which is completely fine. That's how we learn. So now we're going to add watercolor paint on top of this effect. Still a little bit wet. It's actually really cool. So then it kind of connects more. So it looks like it's not actually sitting on top of the watercolor pencil, and will blend in. And when it dries, you'll notice this more. So it's going to look like it's a little bit separate now, but when it dries, it's going to feel like it's all blended in. So that's a way to combine the watercolor pencil and watercolor paint together. And I'm just using a small detailed brush, and we're just putting a few dots down, connecting it, just, you know, linking them together. So yeah, that's how you use the paint and the pencil together. Just another little technique. So now we're going to move on to the textures, or the markers, depending on where you're from. So the markers are really bold, vibrant colour. I use them a lot for shading in dark spots if I want, you know, to stand out and to have a stronger line. When you add water to the markers though, they become quite soft. So we're using blue here for this one, and then we're just going to come over the top with the water, and then we're just going to use that and pull down from there, just keeping the same color tones and letting it fade out. So we're going to dry that, and we're going to come back to that square, and I'll show you what we're going to do with it and how to combine it. So now we're using watercolor pencil again, just one color, just used a crimson pencil, coming over it, over the top with just clean water and a round brush. Just dabbing there. So you see how I lifted a little bit of paint off? That's actually another technique that you can use, where you can lift off paint from watercolor. It helps you create clouds as well. But we'll get into that in the next lesson. So I just wanted it to be one square actually. And what we're going to do is use watercolor paint, not too much water, just kind of straight from the cake, and not completely dry, just a little bit wet. We're going to create a silhouette of a tree. And notice how it just bleeds out just a little bit, because we have a little bit of water on the page. Just creates a softer tree line. And if you want a sharper tree, you just wait for that square to dry, and then you can come over it with watercolor paint, not much water, use a small detailed brush and just fan out your tree branches. But on this occasion, we're just leaving a little bit wet so that we can create a softer silhouette. Just pulling down a few branches. So these are just a few of the techniques that you can use using these tools. So in the next tutorial, I'm going to show you how to use wet and dry techniques and how to use a dry brush. You may actually see some dry brush techniques here, but I wanted to show you them in the next video, so I'm going to leave them for next time. And then we're going to get into a demonstration so you can see how to actually practically apply these tools. So now you can see I'm going over that marker section. See how it's really softened? It's quite a nice color using watercolor. So we're just going to do a little bit of a heart, and I'm just going to apply a little bit of water around the edges directly on the page, and I'm just going to blur that heart out a little bit, which is another technique. So that is the tutorial for today, and that's your little introduction to watercolor paint.